A long, high-pitched tone from the electrocardiogram punctuated the chaos in the operating theater, adding to the stress Irek was under. On a stainless steel table under bright lights was the body of a soldier. Irek was feeling panic set in. As he looked at the soldier, he was a member of the canid-type species called a baragon. He had multiple plasma burns across his body, a missing arm, and severe lacerations in his kidneys and intestines. The soldier, either 19 or 20 years of age, was one of many casualties in the war the Confederacy was engaged in with the Gulsak Pact. "Bring the crash cart!" a calm feminine voice called out over the din, snapping Irek out of her panic spiral. Irek pulled the cart with an array of chemical stimulants, respiratory tools, and a defibrillator. Another nurse was already shaving away even more of the baragon's fur to attach electric leads should other efforts fail. The poor soldier's body, already hooked up to blood packs and monitors, continued to sprout new artificial connections. "Adrenaline," the doctor commanded with calm authority. Irek handed the syringe to the surgeon, a human with pitch-dark skin, who inserted it into the baragon. "Set the metronome and attach a BVM," the doctor stated again. Irek did as instructed and, after setting the metronome, attached the bag valve mask over the patient's snout. Irek began squeezing the red bag attached to the mask in rhythm with the metronome. The surgeon's powerful human hands, forged from musculature designed to resist the tremendous gravity of their homeworld, began to pump the heart. Irek winced when the human strength cracked the patient's ribcage. It was, in these difficult conditions, a necessity to manually pump the heart. The war overwhelmed the Confederacy's medical capacity, requiring the need to resort to more primitive methods where modern machinery was in short supply. The surgeon's collected demeanor while keeping with the rhythm of the metronome helped Irek focus on her work. Manual heart massaging was only something she read about in medical school. The fact the human surgeon was so adept at it was shocking to Irek. The effort persisted for what felt like an eternity. The long, stressful tone continued to peal in the air. The effort wasn't working. "We're going to try the AED," the surgeon called out after stopping her efforts. Irek returned to the cart and set the dial while another nurse attached electrical leads to the soldier's chest. She knew resorting to the electric shock was a last-ditch effort in a dire situation. "Clear," the surgeon called out and activated the AED. The body jolted and the high-pitched tone briefly paused. Irek's hopes it worked were dashed when the tone returned. The surgeon continued to shock the patient. Each shock paused the screeching tone only a moment, just for it to return once more, mocking their efforts to save the solider. The tone finally ceased when the surgeon reached over and flicked the EKG switch to off. The surgeon picked up a nearby recording device and spoke into it. "Patient time of death, 1932, GST. Apparent cause of death, severe blood loss from ruptured kidney. Additional autopsy recommended for full extent of injuries." Irek stood in stunned silence as she looked at the soldier on the table. Bright lights, clean surfaces, and the sterile scent of hospital disinfectants mixed with the red and iron. Tang of blood. While Irek attempted to collect her thoughts, the other nurse huddled in a fetal position against the wall. Death was not something modern medical practitioners ever got used to. If a patient made it to a hospital, medical technology ensured a near guarantee of survival. The only ones who failed to live were those who didn't survive the accident and, therefore, had no need to arrive in a surgery. The war changed things. Evac ships arrived hourly with severe wounds the medical ships were unable to contend with. A critical shortage of equipment cascaded to failures and death in the operating rooms. Medical professionals weren't used to the psychological effects of losing a patient on the table, except for the humans. The species had developed a reputation for being monstrous, strong, durable, terrifying in battle, and they had a penchant to create bizarre technologies. On top of that, they never seemed to flinch in danger. The lead surgeon, a woman named Janelle Richards, was unflappably calm during the stressful affair. Even now, Janelle was kneeling next to the shaken nurse on the floor and whispering calming words. She then helped the poor man up and escorted him to the men's locker room to clean up after surgery. Irek entered her own locker room and began disrobing. The stained garments went into a cart for disposal while she took her body into the showers. She ran a clawed hand through her thick fur. Even though the scrubs protected her body from stains, she still felt like the soldier's blood had collected on her body. Irek lost track of time as she stared blankly into the stream of water. Since, when she got out, Janelle was already dressing in her street clothes. The woman's thick black curled hair atop her head, previously hidden under a surgical cap, puffed out in every direction. She wore a black jacket over a red shirt and had a pair of blue cloth leggings the humans called jeans. There was no indication what had occurred in the operating theater bothered her. Images of the soldier lying on the table kept intruding on Irek's mind. His eyes, staring up at her, pleaded for help. She imagined his mouth moving, blaming her for her failure. The long tone of the EKG screamed at her. "You failed. You failed. You failed." A gentle touch pulled Irek out of her spiral. She looked up and saw Janelle, who spoke. "We saved 7 today. The last one wasn't your fault." "What would you know?" Irek shrugged away from Janelle's hand. "You're a Death Worlder. You don't understand these things." Instead of the expected response, Janelle instead stood and went to her locker. The gentle sound of rustling paper could be heard, and she returned. Irek looked up and saw the doctor with an extended flyer. "Here," Janelle said. "Come with me. I think it will help." Irek gently took the flyer and looked it over. The Confederacy supplied entertainment to the rear support during the war. Supposedly, it was meant to keep up morale. The entertainment the prior week was an odd Earth group doing something called pro wrestling. While Irek appreciated the incredible acrobatics, the odd melodrama act that went along with it confused her. This week, the entertainment was in the cantina. There were 3 musical acts headlined by Irek's favorite idol group, the Stardust Boys. She did find the idea intriguing and thought getting to see her crush, Ms. live on stage in an intimate setting would be fun. Maybe the upbeat music would also help her mood. Irek shoved the flyer in her pocket and replied, "All right, I'll go." The pair left the lockers and passed by the break room where a television was playing. The human worlds have agreed to send direct military support, adding to the growing coalition of Confederate planets assisting the combined Confederate support. The forces are from the human sub-jurisdictions of Russia, China, Greater Europe, Canada, Australia, India, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, Mexico, and coordinated by the United States. The first direct engagement is expected within the next week. A smile passed Janelle's lips. "Looks like our job will be over soon." Irek knew the humans were unusually strong, but she wasn't sure what their small population would do in a major galactic-scale war. She was at least happy Janelle was optimistic. The duo left their surgery and walked across the temporary field. Hospital complex. Set on a low-gravity planet to accommodate the least sturdy Confederacy species, the field hospital was immense. Shuttles were constantly coming and going from orbit, where the blink of hyperspace drives twinkled like stars. Visible on the horizon was a tremendous planetary defense tower, which provided a hyperdrive inhibition field and, if a fleet did come, anti-space weaponry. Their planet was just one of many supporting the bloody conflict. There was a never-ending stream of wounded arriving from the fronts. The 8 surgeries and 1 failure Irek had before needing rest were like a grain of sand on a beach. She felt small and useless. The cantina venue was a short walk away from their surgery. The hospital complex was constructed from temporary buildings in rings. From orbit, the hexagonal rings would appear like a massive honeycomb on the surface. The outer ring consisted of hospital space, convalescents, and residences for hospital personnel. The central part of the ring was designated to natural parks and gardens. At the center were entertainment and food buildings. The arrangement helped blunt the psychological effects of being stuck in a hospital for lengthy periods of time for both patients and staff. Every window had a view of trees, grass, and fountains. The pair showed their hospital credentials at the door before entering the facility. Inside, the cantina was arranged with small 2-person tables in a horseshoe shape around a stage against the far wall. Where Irek entered, both left and right, a long bar wrapped around the edge of the building. The room was already bustling, with hospital staff on their designated break period. Instead of trying to find a table on the floor, Janelle went along the side and found a pair of seats at the bar with a good view of the stage. The bartender was a member of the roo, an avian species. He had purple features and a purple beak, which contrasted regally with the tuxedo he wore. He wiped down the already immaculately cleaned bar with a towel. "What can I get the 2 ladies?" This evening, Irek was having a rough day and decided she could tie one on tonight and ordered large. Anything with 3% alcohol in it. The roo nodded and looked at Janelle. "I suspect you'll be wanting something from our special human stock." "You don't happen to have any old soul bourbon in stock?" "I'm feeling homesick," Janelle replied. "As it happens, we do. We have a bottle of Series 1, the roo replied. "I'll take a double then," Janelle said. After the bartender handed Irek a glass of blue liquor, he went to a special ventilation hood which contained a series of bottles. He placed his hands inside rubber gloves inserted in the side and began mixing a drink before capping it with a metal lid. The bartender extracted the glass and gave it to Janelle. It wasn't that the fumes of human alcohol was toxic to the other species. It was a safety measure to ensure no one accidentally drank one. The glass Janelle had before her on the bar top had enough alcohol in it to give 40 non-human species a strong buzz. Irek suddenly felt like she didn't want to be in the cantina anymore. Her mind went back to the soldier on the table, and she was drinking herself stupid with 3% blue sapphire and waiting to watch her favorite idol group sing. "I don't think this is a good idea." Irek stood to leave when Janelle spoke. "Stick it out. Trust me, it'll help." "If you say so," Irek replied and sat back down. What did the Death Worlder know? They could shrug off powerful Force slugs, and she even heard about the One, special forces human that needed dozens of Jakar soldiers to kill. Soon the lights dimmed and the first act came on stage. Irek recognized him as a famous Sinopian comedian. She loved the videos she saw of his jokes, and he did amazing work integrating his head crest into his act. Except tonight, everything he did fell flat to her. The response in the room was muted. Even when he told his most famous joke about a Sinopian trying on a human bodysuit, it only generated a few mild chuckles. The poor man was even beginning to look uncomfortable on stage. After the act ended, crews began clearing the stage to make room for the Stardust Boys. Irek felt like she should be excited. She was a mere 20 meters away from where Miz would stand and sing, yet she felt empty. When the Stardust Boys came out on stage, there was more response from the audience. It was still muted compared to the normal reaction from their concerts. Irek looked at Miz giving a bow, and she felt nothing. Her favorite idol was right there, and she couldn't muster a small clap, let alone a scream of joy. The show was perfection. All 5 boys moved in flawless choreography, and their singing was the best Irek had heard from them. The lights, the pounding bass, and the upbeat tunes reverberated in the room. Yet still, Irek felt nothing. Her mind continued to stray back on the poor soldier laying dead on the operating table. After the set ended, Irek stood as the room gave a small clap, and a few whistles rang out from the crowd. She turned to Janelle. "This isn't working. Thanks for trying. I think I'll head back to my room and rest." Irek prepared to join the people exiting the venue when Janelle's hand caught her arm. "This isn't what I wanted you to hear. There's still one more act." Irek was confused. She thought the Stardust Boys was the show. Pulling out the flyer she had shoved in her pocket earlier, she looked over the names on the paper. There. Below the Stardust Boys was one more group, the Mama Leisha Band. "Who is that?" Irek asked. "They're from my home state of Mississippi. Now hush. They'll start soon." Janelle lifted her glass, pushed open the sip hole, and took a drink. Her eyes were glued on the stage. The room had mostly cleared out. Only a dozen or so patrons remained in the quiet bar. The stage had a single drum set and a microphone on a stand-up front. The lights in the room went out, leaving only a dim beam illuminating the stage. In the silence, 4 humans walked out. 3 men and 1 woman. Each of them had the same dark skin and black hair as Janelle. One man carried a brass instrument, while another carried a wooden stringed instrument as tall as he was. The third man sat behind the drums while the woman, wearing a red sequined dress which sparkled in the light, stood before the mic. There was no fanfare and no introduction. The human with the brass instrument pressed one end against his lips. The one on the drums began a slow beat with the snare, and the man with the brass blew. A low melody made from long tones pealed in the air, and the man with the tall stringed instrument began to pluck. The stringed instrument's deep thrum filled there and added to the mournful memory. Then the woman began to sing. The song's tempo was slow, and the woman's voice pitched low. In lyrics made of long-held notes, she sung of hardship, loss, and pain. An intricate mix of poetry and tune reverberated in Irek's body as she, sat in the darkness. The mostly empty room added to the mournful sensation seeping into her bones. Tears began to flow as the woman sang of losing a child to disease. Her story mixed the horrors of poverty and death while ripping at Irek's very soul. Numbness was replaced by sorrow as she fell into the tune, sung by the sparkling woman in red on the stage. Then it was over. The song didn't end with a big finale or a flash. The volume slowly lowered and faded away, much like the lives of those in the song. Silence returned to the dark room. No claps were heard, nor the chatter of people. The four on stage gave a small bow, and just as silently as they entered, they left. They were ghosts who arrived and told a mournful tale only to fade away once more in the night. Irek's tears kept flowing. She turned to reach for a bar napkin to dry her eyes, and to her surprise, she saw Janelle. The human's eyes were also tearing as she silently stared out at the stage. Here, the powerful, terrifying Death Worlder was weeping to a song the same as Irek. I don't understand. Why did you want me to hear such a sad song when we're surrounded by all this death? Irek whispered. Instead of answering directly, Janelle said something different. The people of the Confederation have a number of misconceptions about us. Humanity, through a unique set of conditions and random chance, look to you to be monsters. We're strong, durable, and seem unflappable in stress. Janelle paused and picked up a napkin of her own to dab away the tears. Where we are from, we are weak, fragile, and, until recently, have been constantly reminded of it. A meager 2 centuries ago, even our wealthiest elites would lose children to common disease. War, sickness, and hatred ran rampant. Why would you want to make depressing music then? Why not happy music? Irek asked, not understanding the reasoning behind the song she just heard. Why would anyone ever want to listen to something so sad? We learned something important. When dealing with hardship, it's important to confront it. We developed tragic plays, black humor, and, from where I'm from, we created the blues. We learned if we attempted to distract ourselves from the horrors of our world with happy tunes, we only made things worse. Toxic positivity, Janelle explained. These songs aren't meant to remind us things are bad. They're meant to help us overcome it by making us confront reality. I still don't understand, Irek said. Tell me, Janelle motioned with her drink. How are you feeling? Now? Irek stopped and thought. Her sadness and pain were still present, but it was no longer unbearable. It was as if the tears the song induced drained away the depression and hopelessness she felt earlier in the evening. I feel like I can go on tomorrow. Janelle gave a small smile, her white teeth brilliant against her dark skin. It's a start. You'll never feel truly happy in times like these. It's a constant struggle and challenge. What we can do is confront it and not back down. We still have more lives to save tomorrow. We can then take solace this will not go on forever. Irek was beginning to understand. The humans were from a death world. She had only thought of them as terrifying giants among the stars. She never stopped to consider what they had to go through living on one. She looked over Janelle and saw no sign of natural claws, an armored skeleton, or large fangs. They had to contend with a hostile environment without imposing speed or thick skin. And not only did they survive in such a hostile environment, they thrived. The humans weren't monsters. They lived among them and came out strong. They had wisdom in how they approached loss and pain. Irek resolved herself. The humans would, too, be broken if they refused to confront the pain of life. Irek would do the same. She had patients' lives counting on it. Now enjoy next amazing story. Feyor sat curled in a hollow of an old tree stump, his breath heavy in his breast. He huffed to cool his flush skin under his fur as he watched his breath puff on the frigid air. He gripped his combat knife, his last means of protection after. He dropped his plasma rifle in his panicked flight, eyes darting over the forest. Feyor observed the mist hanging low over the land, oppressing him in its dull gloom. Shadows flickered and moved through the trees as the rare sub-satellite orbiting. The planet's moon moved along its path. The only sounds accompanying the dance was the rhythmic chirp of insects in the night. The shifting of light and shadow created illusions among the trees. Feyor knew the shifting apparitions in the branches were fantasy conjured by his mind. Whatever. Stockton would never make itself known so clearly. Feyor tried to calm his breath and hold back a ragged wheeze that could reveal his sanctuary to the creature in the mist. None in his battalion ever saw it. He closed his eyes and thought back to how his nightmarish ordeal began. When the colonialist Confederacy started the war by conquering the peaceful Jikau Democratic People's Republic, the Gulsak Pact called for volunteers. Like all good patriots, Feyor heeded the call. Besides, the volunteers received better assignments than the conscripts. It wasn't a hard decision. State media for years broadcast the atrocities of the Confederacy. Widespread famine, slavery, and poverty ruled their worlds. Their science was in shambles, and they even almost destroyed one of their own trade stations with little more than a plate of food. It was madness. It was only by the honor and grace of the Pact they weren't absorbed into their enlightened way of life. After his mandatory 2-week training, he was assigned to his battalion. 400 strong and commanded by the great Commissar Algar, his battalion was ordered to participate in the war on one of the Confederacy's key military worlds. It was a war they never got to see. The battalion was graced with the honor of deploying on one of the Pact's newest transport vessels, with the latest warp drive said to surpass even the fake specifications Confederate propagandists created for their own warp devices. That was until the warp drive catastrophically failed during their journey and sent them out of FTL off course. It was only by providence did the ship exit warp near a remote habitable world in Confederate space. Needing to jettison on escape pods, the battalion was only able to take personal arms. Vehicles, artillery, and heavy munitions were left behind, burned in the atmosphere as the ship fell into the planet's gravity well. The battalion couldn't even bring ration packs. It took over an hour to reorganize the battalion in the scrub forest they found themselves in. Whispers spread among the soldiers of corruption in the company contracted to build the warp drive. Fayor knew it was all propaganda spread by foreign forces. Pact technology was flawless. The failures Fayor and others experienced were a result of user incompetence. Thankfully, Commissar Algar silenced the dissenters with judicious use of summary executions. It only took 4 to remind the rest of the errors of dissent. The first order of business was to find a means of communication. During the escape, the ship pilots were able to identify the world as inhabited. The little information they were able to glean before leaving the ship indicated the world was not densely populated with only one city with a spaceport present. The battalion would need to locate and occupy the city to at least request extraction. Otherwise, they would commandeer ships to reach the war from the local population. Luck held with the battalion on the first day when they found a small ranching community in a wide plain on the planet. Without rations, the trip to the city would have ended in starvation. Now, with large bovid animals grazing vast fields, they had plenty to eat. The locals proved easy to conquer. Numbering around 100 individuals, the locals were made up of 3 Confederate races: a canid type, a felid type, and a small family of a strange, short, densely muscled, mostly hairless species. Apart from the hairless ones, who proved unusually strong, the community quickly fell. It was the final moment that went right for the battalion. The soldiers, on the commissar's orders, were permitted to enjoy the comforts of the local population. Fayor, being a junior enlisted soldier, had to share his with 4 others. The upside was she lost her fight when it came to his turn. After executing the barbarians, the battalion scoured the town and found a map. It would take a week of marching through another forest to reach the city. The community only had a small number of personal conveyances, too small to move the soldiers, so they left them behind. Packs full of bovine meat and a warm fire of a burning town at their backs. The soldiers crossed the plains and entered the next forest with spirits high. The first 2 nights were routine, morale was good, and the trip went without error. It began on the 3rd day. The commissar was reprimanding a soldier during mid-morning for misreading the map and taking the battalion off course. During his corrective lecture, the commissar's head silently spouted blood, and he fell over dead. While the soldiers stared in shock, more fell. All their officers began to drop one by one, their colorful uniforms and thick ribbons landing hard. In the loam, the entire chain of command was killed in rapid succession. The battalion panicked. They began to wildly fire in every direction, hoping to hit their unseen foe. A dozen more were killed by friendly fire before a senior enlisted man brought them under control. Fayor and the others peered in every direction, silently looking for their attackers. Whispers among the soldiers spoke of the impossibility of the attack. Medics examining the fallen officers found no projectiles. The wounds had burn marks consistent with energy attacks, yet no one saw a plasma bolt or heard the sizzle on the air. The backwards Confederacy couldn't possibly have technology to kill without a sound. Worse, the forest was empty. No one saw a thing in the surrounding area. Only low shrubs, dried leaves, and hanging moss swaying in the trees. With the volume of fire they sent in every direction, whoever attacked them must have been hit. Yet there was nothing. Word of ghosts in the forest began to spread among the soldiers. A senior enlisted man donned the commissar hat and executed a few dissenters, returning control to the shrinking battalion. Pace slowed as they pressed on. The soldiers were on edge, looking into the forest for any sign of movement. They saw none. No more attacks came that day. The new commissar ensured to establish double guard that night. Forming a tight ring, the soldiers curled on the ground to sleep. It took Feor long hours to finally drift away. As the sun rose, screams echoed out. Over the group, Feor and the other soldiers jumped, gripping their plasma rifles to prepare for an attack. None came. The scream came from a soldier pointing into the distance. Feor's eyes followed the finger, and he began to heave from illness. There, against a tree, was one of the night watchmen. His wrists were suspended above his head and nailed to the trunk. His empty sockets, eyes gouged out, stared at the camp in silence. A deep puncture wound was found in the base of his neck, cutting off his ability to scream as he died. Affixed to his uniform was a single photo. Feor recognized the face on the image. It was the woman he shared with the guard, now dead upon the tree. The other 24 guards assigned the final watch of the night were nowhere to be seen. Whatever stalked and killed the officers the day before had come without a sound in the dark and dispatched trained pack soldiers without a trace. The commissar gathered the soldiers and pressed them on. The sooner they were out of this infernal forest, the sooner they'd be away from the ghost. As they moved, they found their missing guards. Each hung upon a tree, each with their throat gouged out, each with a new photo of a resident of the community they burned. The ghost was mocking them. Whenever the commissar ordered a new path to take, they would find another body staked upon a tree. It knew how they thought. It knew where they went. They found all 24 missing guards, each with their own photo attached to their lapel. It was telling them they made a grave error purging the inferior ones. No one slept the next night. They were all too terrified to be the next. No attack came in the dark, and no one vanished into the gloom. The silence felt even worse than an attack. The next day, more soldiers began to fall, not to invisible shots, but to strange traps. Men stepped into holes with sharpened branches positioned in such a way their legs would shred when removed. Inconspicuous rocks or piles of leaves would explode, leaving bloody carnage in their wake. The soldiers had nowhere to go. Their travel slowed to a crawl, as more of their own were left behind to grievous wounds. The ghost, still invisible, continued to hound them. As their numbers dwindled, more began to fall to invisible attacks. Heads pulped in and chests burst out. Each time the men would fire into the forest, and each time they hit nothing. Their initial 400 had now fallen to 80. A trail of death was left behind in the woods, their comrades left to the carrion of nature. It was earlier on the final night that the true panic set in. The men, exhausted and delirious from a lack of sleep, suffered another attack. Pulsing blue flashes of light cast terrifying shadows among the trees when the soldiers blindly fired their plasma rifles into the dark. More friendly fire took out their compatriots. Feor finally broke. He sprinted, away from the diminishing squad into the forest. At some point he lost his plasma rifle as he ran. Mist clung to his fur as he panted in his sprint. The only sounds were the distant screams that fell in intensity and then went silent. Now he sat in a hollow of a tree, waiting for his time to come. He knew his knife would do no good against whatever it is that killed 400 men without leaving a trace. It was his last piece of comfort of the terror he experienced. Then, in the woods, he saw motion. An inconspicuous mat of leaves began to slowly rise up. Then the moss from a tree detached and began to walk. A bush shuddered and disgorged a man-shaped form. 4 more such creatures materialized in the night, each holding a strange rifle in their hands. In place of a head, more foliage grew. As if the spirits of the forest disgorged its defenders to punish the soldiers. The thing slowly walked without making a sound in Feor's direction. He pressed his body up against the rotted wood behind, willing himself to meld into the safety of the trunk. Then the 7 figures stopped and stared, rifles held low. Why? Feor stuttered. Why are you doing this? One of the figures silently moved an arm. In its hand was a picture of one of the hairless races with long yellow hair. With the movement, Feor recognized it wasn't a spirit of the forest. It was a person wearing complex clothing to allow it to blend into the environment. Feor's eyes drifted toward its face. Covered in complex paint to mimic the natural environment, Feor recognized the attacker as a member of the same hairless aliens, found at the small community. Its brown eyes bored back into Feor. Then Feor caught the only color in the ensemble, a small patch on its chest. The patch was a rectangle, The right two-thirds were split evenly along its horizon, the top a field of white while the bottom a field of red. The left third was a vertical field of blue. Within the field of blue was a white pentagram shape. "Why?" the alien whispered. "Simple. You done messed with Texas." These were the last sounds Fair heard before the alien raised its weapon and pulled the trigger. Enjoy next story. Dottie's breath hitched in awe when he stepped into the Dungeon Control Center, or the DCC, for the first time. He still felt like it was all a dream. The moment he received the letter from Otherworld Labyrinth, the preeminent S-Class dungeon, run by the Dark Lord himself, saying he got the job, Davies thought it was a cruel prank. He sweated ice crystals as the days passed. It felt unreal. It was the dream job everyone at Demonic U aspired for. Sure, Dides was not worried about going unemployed after graduation. He was in the top 5% of the DCC technician path at the best university in the underworld. He was expecting he would get at least into a D-class dungeon like Twisting Paths or Mermaid Falls. He had applied to them mainly because they were close to home, and his parents agreed to rent out a room for a year or two until he was promoted up the ranks. The application to the new hire opening at Otherworld Labyrinth was a lark. Those jobs were usually reserved for only the best of the best. Davies fully expected the valedictorian, a succubus named Tognikoms, to get the job. Then, somehow, Davies not only managed to get an interview call, he made it through all 3 rounds, and now he was entering the DCC with his round red face. Gracing a newly printed employee badge, Davies was overwhelmed. He had been in a simulated DCC in the campus lab before. The real thing was something else. The green crystals poking out of the wall in a neat grid pattern were the recording cones. The dungeon runners sent to challenge the labyrinth would have their image captured and broadcast out to the underworld for entertainment. The runners at Otherworld Labyrinth were particularly popular and dominated the primetime evening slot. Then there was the massive purple crystal on the other wall. This was the Dimensional Summoning Sapphire, the DSS. It was here the Otherworld Labyrinth would reach out into the infinite dimensions and snap an unsuspecting victim to challenge the dungeon. The prize for those who run the dungeon successfully are vast riches and powers enough to make them kings and emperors back home. For most, it led to their demise. It was in their demise the underworld sustained its magic. The small expense of sending the winners back with power and wealth was worth it. It was also necessary since the Overgod frowned on the underworld snatching and murdering people. The dungeon system was a compromise since it was also not reasonable to starve the demons of their livelihood. "Ah, if it isn't our new trainee, welcome!" A deep, rumbling growl filled the room. Davies drew his eyes away from the DSS and tracked it toward a long control panel along a bank of magical viewing slates. There, he saw a towering Oxian standing with a friendly grin on his face. His bulbous red head sported tall ox horns. Thick fangs jutted up from his pronounced underbite, his teeth capped with obsidian. He had thick, rippling muscles and a brown, goat hoof bottom half. The demon was everything a DCC technician should be, far more imposing than a spratling like Dides could ever aspire to be. Starting today, I'll be your new supervisor, Red Alpstulb. "I see you've already begun familiarizing yourself with the DCC, Davies," Red Alpstulb thundered. "Sorry, sir. I got ahead of myself," Davies stammered. Red Alpstulb's laughter boomed in the room, slightly shaking the crystal array. His face immediately changed to worry. "Oops, I really should watch myself. I don't want to damage the crystals again. The Dark Lord really doesn't like the overhead expenses getting out of hand. You can just call me Rhett. I don't like sir, and my full name is a mouthful." "Thanks, Rhett. You can call me Day," Day replied. Rhett clapped his meaty hands together with a loud boom. "Then let's jump into things. Since you're a fellow DU grad, I'll assume you already know the basics. I believe in teaching by doing." Day forced a smile on his face. "Are you sure?" Rhett snorted. "Of course. That's how I learned. I was thrown in on the first day and had a demon just like me watching close. The real deal is just like the one at the DU lab. You'll feel right at home." Day clicked his clawed hands together. "I'll give it a try." Rhett gestured to the command chair. "Then I'll leave it to you. Today I even arranged a special treat. We found a new reality and a whole new race to try out in Otherworld Labyrinth. Euphoria rose in Day's mind, banishing his insecurities. A new race? This would be an incredible resume builder, and hopefully he could brag to his friends when it ran on a Sunday night broadcast. Day's hands hovered over the control panel. He found the door mechanisms, trap system, monster respawn controls, and the summoning dial. He even reviewed the dungeon design tools, which he knew would be something he would utilize down the line when the dungeon needed a refresh. Looking at the summoning dial, Day read the display crystal. EE, Yarth, and Homan. Those are odd names for a world and a people. What are the selection criteria for them? Rhett grinned. Oh, they're unusual indeed. Their world, if you can believe it, has no magic at all. They have billions on one planet. Not only will one here and there not be missed, they have no means to fight back. The Overgod missed this easy one. Day smiled as he reached down tentatively to the summoning controls. He looked back once more, and Rhett gave a small nod of approval. Then Dia pressed the crystal. On the screen, a blue flash of light waved out in a simple cave room. The cave was a basic dome design with a single tunnel for an exit. Glowing white moss bathed the space in a dim light. When the flash subsided, Day gasped. He had seen vids and images on text scrolls. This was the first time he had ever seen an otherworlder live. The creature, the Homan, was hideous. It had pale, thin skin, skinny limbs, and a pair of weird lumps on its chest. The head was the only place with any fur, which was a long, sickly-looking red color stringing down to its shoulder area. The creature covered itself with woven plant matter, obscuring the body beneath. Day looked down at his control panel. According to the data, it was a female of the Homan species. He blanched at the thought of anything willing to mate with such a disgusting creature to perpetuate the species. The fuck? The Homan exclaimed, the velvet tones grating Day's ears. Are they all this unpleasant to look at? Day asked. Most species are, Rhett replied. Occasionally we get more pleasant-looking ones like minotaurs, oni, or orcs. I suggest you don't get too enamored with them, though. They may look more attractive, but they're still a different species. It's not good to get too attached. Day flicked his forked tongue in disgust. Only a degenerate would find these things appealing. Looking at the control panel, Day found the first of his trap options. The standard operating procedure was the food trap. For some strange reason, the summoning crystal always made new arrivals feel hungry. Standard dungeon operating procedure was to scan the home world and provide a table with the species delicacy. The delicacy was laced with a weak sedative that reduced mental function. It made for a more entertaining trip when the victim was not operating at full capacity. Day pressed the crystal and watched as a round table manifested in the cave. Then food and drink began to appear on the surface. Then it kept going and going. When the table was full, it stopped and the console let out a warming chime. There was a strange error Day never saw in labs. Rhett stomped over and looked. Ice beaded up on Day's head as he felt panic rising in his chest. I'm sorry. Did I break something? Rhett maneuvered through a few diagnostics. No, you did nothing wrong. This is strange. The system automatically scans the world and provides the most appealing comfort food for the race. The protocol seems to be acting up. It wants to produce even more than is already out there. That's odd. I read there are only 1 or 2 food items and a drink item the races prefer, Dee replied. Rhett scratched one of his large ox horns. I've never seen something like this before. The magic is acting confused. From what I'm reading, these Homans must be massive eaters. It produced things called omuris, curry, naan, sopapilas, and something called a Big Mac. The liquids are milk with blood, guarana, dunkelweiss, and Mad Dog 2020. There are even more stored in the buffer while the system waits for the table to clear. I'll have to clear the system and hope the Homan is satisfied with what is there. While Rhett worked, Dee watched the Homan female on the screen. She looked at the table and walked over, looking down at the spread. Then the Homan made a strange snorting noise and spoke. Are you kidding me? What kind of moron would eat random food lying around in a cave? Then, to Day's surprise, she walked past without touching any of the food and moved down the tunnel. Is this normal? Day asked. Rhett looked up at the panel and frowned. No. The only time we ever see anyone notice the trick are the Fae, yet that's only about 20% of the time. We must have gotten a particularly paranoid one. Don't worry, the next one will get her. Day looked forward to the next one. The second test was a riddle called the trick doors. The trick doors were one door that always lied and the other which always told the truth. It was up to the victim to decipher which one was which and then identify the safe door. The other lead to the victim's demise. Few specimens were ever smart enough to figure out the riddle, leading to a 50% failure rate. The doors were a popular and famous part of the Otherworld labyrinth. "Watch this," Rhett said with a smile as he pointed to the screen. The Hum-Man was walking through the tunnel slowly, carefully observing her surroundings. She was cautious, which would make for an entertaining show should she make it past the trick doors. Then she came upon the doors and paused. Compared to the Hum-Man, the doors stood 3 times her height. On each was an attractive gargoyle that were run by a sophisticated magical artificial intelligence system. They would provide the rules of the doors. The one on the left was currently set as the liar, while the one on the right was the truth. "Stop!" The 2 doors thundered in unison, causing the Hum-Man to slightly jump and let out a squeak. The door on the left spoke. "To pass us, you must ponder our riddle." The door on the right went next. "One of us leads to safety." The door on the left spoke. "The other to your doom." "One of us only speaks lies," the door on the right said, "while the other only speaks the truth," the left continued. Then in unison they spoke. "Ask us your questions and make your decision. The choice is yours." Normally, in all the videos, the victims would look panicked before beginning to ask a series of questions. The Hum-Man behaved differently. She started laughing. "Is this a prank?" The liar shouted yes, while the truth shouted no. The Hum-Man shook her head. "Is David Bowie going to sing at me back there?" The liar shouted yes, while the truth shouted no. "This is fucking stupid," the female snorted. "I mean, the setup doesn't even make sense." "What is she talking about?" Day asked. Rhett only shrugged his shoulders, his face screwed with a perplexed expression. "Come on, you can't even tell me the rules if you were following them. If one of you always lies and you both spoke, you by definition had to tell the truth to even explain the rules of the game," the female continued. Day observed the doors twitch and a series of error codes flash across his console. "And before you say anything, this better not be some lame Loki's wager bullshit. Like the liar was thinking of the truthful one and working the semantics of the sentence structure. Sure, it's a lie to say that one always lies, but that's a dumb cop-out." The female ranted at the doors. The doors once again twitched and spoke in unison. "Ask your question." "Fine, okay. Did either of you explain how the rules work to me?" the female asked. "No," the liar replied, while the truthful one said, "Yes." The woman threw up her hands. "Shit! This is the dumbest riddle ever. Is someone watching this? Did you expect me to ask a bunch of questions that could be interpreted either way? Are you the liar? Are you the truthful one? This isn't complicated. It's as dumb as asking if my shirt is red." "Yes," the liar replied, while the truthful one said no. The female's shirt was green. The female rolled her eyes. "Which is the safe door?" "He is both doors," said. The female pointed at the liar. "Open up, bitch." "How?" Rhett stammered. Dee looked at the console and noticed the path the Hum-Man female picked was indeed the safe path. She had set an all-time record. The liar creaked open, inviting the Hum-Man to enter. Except the Hum-Man didn't move. "You think I'm going to fall for that?" Rhett and Day peered at the victim and didn't comprehend what was going on. "No way," the Hum-Man continued. "You're probably bluffing. If you could tell me the rules, that means both of you are perfectly capable of telling a truth." "Tell me? How is it possible for a liar to properly explain the rules of this game?" A warning siren began to blare as the doors twitched rapidly. "Logic error, unable to respond," both doors said at the same time. The Hum-Man looked up at the sky. "Oh, did I break your toy? Liar's paradox, look it up. Come on, explain how a liar can tell the truth." The doors began to smoke and rumble. Then a big meaty hand slammed down on a console button Day had never seen in his lab work. Suddenly, the Hum-Man vanished in a flash of light. "What was that?" Day asked, shocked. "An emergency banishment. I sent the Hum-Man back to EE Yarth," Rhett replied as he wiped away the ice crystals on his brow. He then pressed another button to deactivate the trick doors. "I don't understand." "What did the Hum-Man just do?" Day asked. Instead of responding, Rhett pointed to the recording crystals. "From the top corner, count 3 over and 5 down. Bring me that crystal." Day did as instructed, carefully pulling the delicate recording crystal from the socket. When he turned, he saw Rhett operating the control panel of the DSS. Day approached and handed Rhett the crystal. He then uttered "whoops" and smashed the crystal down on the floor, shattering it. Day was flabbergasted. "What's going on?" Rhett took a deep breath and looked at Day closely. This is an order from your manager. What you saw today, it didn't happen. Yarth and Hummans don't exist. I accidentally dropped the recording crystal when changing it out. It's just a small overhead item anyway. I didn't manipulate the DSS and permanently block a dimension for use. Understand? Day shook his head in agreement. But I still don't understand why. Rhett sighed. I really don't want to explain to the Dark Lord his riddle has so many terrible flaws in it, or worse, broadcast that. It's better to keep those crazy Hummans out of here. If that's what we got by random out of billions, imagine how much worse something else would be. Day blinked in confusion. This was turning out to be a strange first day, one he couldn't even tell his friends about. Come on, Rhett rumbled. Get a repair kit. We have a door to fix. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.